really have enjoyed the last couple months, couple months now, as we've had to figure out how to do worship a little differently, but I am guardedly optimistic that we will be returning to congregational singing in the very near future, and we'll let you know when that's going to happen. And I am excited for that as well. And I'm also excited for baptisms. We have people wanting to get baptized. If you are interested, if you've never been baptized, boy, what an opportunity to get baptized. You have a teenager who wants to get baptized or a child who wants to get baptized. Maybe you're watching at home this morning and you or one of your family members wants to get baptized. As soon as we can get back together, we're going to, in a little bit larger numbers, we're going to do that. We're waiting on a couple things, actually. We ordered new lighting for our stage this week, and we also ordered additional cameras. So when we do the baptism, we can have a camera focused on the baptismal so that everybody can see it. So we're waiting on those. But if you're interested, would you reach out to me, call the church office, talk to Pastor JC, talk to Pastor Maureen, talk to one of your small group leaders and have them contact us. We want to just have a big, grand celebration here in the not too distant future. We're going to start a new series this morning, and it is on Psalm 23, and I am very much excited about it. I get to schedule sermons. I sort of pick, and I tend to be a little bit far out in terms of planning into the future, but I haven't been lately. 2020 and 21 I've kind of just been flying by the seat of my pants a lot of times, adjusting to things. And oftentimes I'll pick a sermon series because I feel as a community, as a group of people, this is something maybe we need to be focusing on for a particular season. I will be honest with you. Psalm 23 was in some ways a selfish pick. In a time of all of the tumult that we've experienced over the last, going on 11 months now, I was reading Psalm 23 one day, and I said, this is where I want to go. I need this right now for my soul and for my spirit. And I'm guessing that for some of you as well, you are exhausted or worn out or frustrated or weary. And I think this is a great time for us to come together once a week, open up God's Word, and focus in on what he says to us in this beautiful song of David, which I think is like food for our soul. I also know that there are people out there watching this morning who have friends who are dealing with maybe anxiety or worry, fear, frustration. And if you're watching on like social media, like our Facebook page, you can share this with a friend. There's no obligation. You can just click share and share it with a friend who you think may need to hear this message this morning. My hope is that this would be a blessing for us, that it would just sort of, in our own lives, cause us to pause and reflect on the goodness of God, and this morning on the sufficiency of God. Anita and I head over to the west side fairly often. My parents are both on the west side of the state, or as we on this side of the state like to call the coast. Anybody here from the west side and you moved over here and people go, oh, you're going. I remember one day I was heading to Issaquah and somebody goes, oh, you're heading to the coast. And I said, no, I'm heading to Issaquah. And they go, yeah, the coast. And just, I don't mean to sound condescending for folks who grew up over here, but know this. Issaquah is not near the coast, okay? Just so you're aware, all right? There are people here that anything 1 foot left of Snoqualmie Summit is the coast. And that's not true, Marcus. That's not a true statement. So anyway, we head over to the coast quite a bit. I give up. And we oftentimes, most of our families now on the north end of Puget Sound, so we most likely take Stevens Pass. And there is a part of Stevens Pass, the trip, that I like probably more than any other. I know my wife is this way. And it's the drive right as you exit Leavenworth, heading westbound through Tumwater Canyon. And the steep slopes of Tumwater Canyon and the winding road through Tumwater Canyon. I particularly like the drive in the early spring when the runoff is really high And looking down into the Wenatchee River, the waves are just massive, and they kind of speak to the power and the awesomeness of our God. It's just, especially on a clear blue day, the valley just explodes, and the canyon explodes, and it's just awesome. But there's another part that also gets my attention, and it's as you get just above the diversion dam. Because of the diversion dam, the water just becomes glassy and smooth. And there's something about that little area right there by the candy shop, for those of you locals who know what I'm talking about, where the water is just calm. Above it is tumult and rapid, and below it the same. But for this little window, it is smooth and calm. And whether rough water, explosive water, bubbling water, or still water, God is in both places. The river can be a beautiful metaphor for life, and in many ways we have been going through the rapids. And for the next several weeks, I would like us to be in the still water and focusing in on the calm that God invites us into. We're going to talk about the peaceful and restorative power of God over the next 4 weeks. And our text is probably without question the most famous text of David's songs, Psalm 23. The psalm is so famous that most people in the Western world who don't even attend church have heard and know Psalm 23. The psalm right before, this is important to notice, and it might be interesting, some of you might want to thumb back and look. The psalm right before Psalm 22 is actually a psalm about the cross. It is a prophetic psalm about the cross. It is the psalm that contains the line, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And so the contrast between Psalm 22 and Psalm 23 is powerful. That in this deep, dark trough, this well of the cross, this heaviness of the cross, right after it, in this next psalm, we are invited into a place or a position of peace and of calm. Psalm 22 is a psalm about the struggle for righteousness. And then in Psalm 23, hope bursts onto the scene. We're going to do something a little different. We've got certain families that are staying home because of health risks during the coronavirus. We have some that are coming. We've had teens up here every week. We're going to have one of our teens read Psalm 23 on video this morning, but I'd ask that we'd stand and listen as he reads Psalm 23.
He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
It is good to see Xander, and Xander looks older to me. Did anybody else notice that? Xander, if you're watching at home, Xander, first off, solid work, and you look older. And you probably already knew that, but since we don't get to see each other all the time right now, it was a little bit of a surprise. So are you worn out this morning? Are you frazzled? Are you shaken? Are you unsettled? Psalm 23 is for you. Let's talk about the shepherd of peace this morning, okay? First off, it's important to note that you have a shepherd. I have a shepherd. We have a shepherd. And there is something significant about that. The passage starts out, the Lord is my shepherd. I believe without personally repeating and living the first line of Psalm 23, it is impossible to know the rest of Psalm 23. In other words, if you are going to take in the fullness of Psalm 23 and experience it deep into the fiber of your being, you have to settle on the first line. The Lord is my shepherd. Until you get, and this is really a lordship issue, until you give over to the idea that God is the shepherd, he is the one leading me, he leads me in all areas. Sometimes he leads me against my will, sometimes he leads me in ways I'm uncomfortable going, but he leads me. I think it's impossible to fully understand the peace that follows. Okay? This is probably the most important line in the psalm. The Lord is my shepherd. We're making a proclamation of lordship when we say it. Let's say this together. The Lord is my shepherd. Let's do it again. The Lord is my shepherd. If we acknowledge God as our guide, circumstances cannot impede peace, okay? Circumstances cannot shake our peace. Jesus himself describes this shepherd relationship in John chapter 10, okay? In the gospel, we hear Jesus in great detail describe what the relationship between himself as shepherd and us as sheep looks like, all right? And in John 10, starting in verse 11, it says, I'm the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Okay, so we know right off the bat, Jesus is willing to die for us. That should give us confidence. Number two, the hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. For many of us, we put our trust oftentimes in the hired hand as opposed to the shepherd. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he's a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. Then verse 14, I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me and I know the Father and lay down my life for the sheep. Jesus knows us. Okay? We should find confidence in that. He is our shepherd, knowing us, knowing our weakness, knowing our frailties, knowing our worries. He is our shepherd, okay? Then he says this in verse 16, I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them in also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. This idea that Jesus is still looking for more sheep to bring into the pen. There's an evangelistic side of this. And so this is our opportunity as his sheep to help look for other sheep and bring them in. So a couple things. This sheep is willing to die for you, will not abandon you. The shepherd is willing to die for you, will not abandon you, knows you intimately, and is looking for other sheep that don't know him. Now, the key again is this. We have to know the shepherd. It says that. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. What is our role in this? It is to know the shepherd. Okay? If we are going to follow Jesus, we have to know him. And the way to know him is through this. His love letter to us. His word to us. He invites us into a deep knowing of him. We are fully dependent on the shepherd. Okay? And without a shepherd, we're going to struggle. We live in a world where we don't like to have authority over us. We rebel against authority. And I would say that certain times it is vital that we push back against bad authority. But in Jesus, we have an authority that we can trust entirely and put our faith in. And our very survival, our living in this world is wholly dependent on trusting in this shepherd. He has everything we need. Now, years ago, I was speaking at a teen camp in South Idaho. And one of the activities, they decided to take the camp whitewater rafting. And they divided us into little small teams. And I was given a group of junior hires to supervise. Now, some of you are going, oh, I feel bad for them. I loved working with junior hires when I was a youth pastor. My favorite group to work with was junior hires. And so we went, I forget what river it was in South Idaho, but we went whitewater rafting. How many of you have whitewater rafted before? Yeah, it's a lot of fun, a whole bunch of fun. And we met with the guide ahead of time. And the guide walked us through what we were supposed to do, gave us instructions for how we were to be rowing, One side, occasionally we'd have one side rowing forward and one side rowing backwards, and he would bark out, and we got out into some still water before the rapids and practiced all of our commands. And so I was in the boat with a guide and 6 or 7 junior hires, I think. And I think they were all junior high boys, which makes this story even more problematic. So we started down the rapids, and the first rapids were little rapids, like I think they're called class 1 and 2 rapids. They're kind of smaller rapids. Fun, but smaller. And we had a great time, but near the end was the big rapid for the day, and it had some scary sounding name and that they tell you to get you all worked up. And we were getting to that rapid, and you know, our guide kind of reminded us of what we were supposed to do. And we got into that rapid, and we did not do real well at following his instructions, and we went kind of where we weren't supposed to go. That's not the interesting part of the story. The interesting part of the story happens when the guide got popped out of the boat. And now it's me and 5 or 6 or 7 junior hires. I'd lost count by that point. I'm now the adult in the boat. And I am wildly unqualified. And it was every person for himself. And I don't know how we got out of the rapids. Several more kids fell in. We all sort of regrouped downstream. Everybody survived. But us without a shepherd in our life is like a boat full of junior hires trying to row through a rapid on their own. And when trouble hits, there's a tendency for us to sort of chase our own wisdom, which is not always the best thing to do. We desperately need a shepherd. You know, when I was going through the rapid, I don't think I thought of it at the time. I think I was kind of facing my own mortality at the time as we were going through the rapids. But I remember thinking that verse later, where there is no vision, the people perish, right? We lacked vision in that boat, being provided by a shepherd. The importance of a shepherd, a guide, our Lord, cannot be overstated because the shepherd is sufficient. Okay, the shepherd is sufficient. And when we sort of embrace that fact that what we need more than anything else in the world is a shepherd, other things start to fall into place. I think during, the last 11 months, a lot of us have asked a lot of questions like, what if my finances fail? Or what if this happens? Or what if that happens? And we start to go down rabbit trails of worry, when instead of going to those places of what if this happens, we need to go to this place of the Lord is sufficient. Whatever happens, God is going to be sufficient. The second half of verse 1 says this. In the translation we looked at, it said, I shall not want. There's some other translations I really liked. One says, I lack nothing. I like that. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. Another said, I have everything I need. The Lord is my shepherd. As long as I am tethered to the Lord, I have what I need. It's interesting. When I think of the things materialistic, the stuff that I actually need, versus the stuff that I really want in my life, what I actually need to exist is really fairly small. I've come to sort of believe that I need all of these things to live, but the stuff that I actually need to live is fairly small. God provides. He meets needs. By the way, the metaphor for the sheep is a beautiful metaphor. I remember, one time I was complaining to Norm about being a pastor, and Norm, he's going to be mad probably that I shared this, but that's why I didn't ask him permission. Norm said, he goes, you're a shepherd and you deal with sheep. Sometimes sheep stink. And remember him saying that. And by the way, sometimes as a pastor, you're not the Lord. Sometimes you stink a little bit too, right? I was reading about the relationship in the first century between the shepherd and this flock that he would likely tend. And what do we know about a shepherd's life? This is what I learned. It's a full-time commitment. Sheep, if you've been around sheep, well, they're sheep, right? A lot of times they do the wrong thing. Sheep are helpless to defend themselves against their natural enemies in the environment. Lions, bears, wolves, hyenas, foxes. All of those things, sheep are at a marked disadvantage. And the problem is there's not an hour where those predators attack. They can attack any time over a 24-hour period, right? There's no safe moment for the sheep. So shepherding is a full-time experience, worked in shifts. The sheep pretty much constantly need somebody watching over them. So a shepherd can't relax. Sheep must be led to green grass and to cool water. You have to take them to their food source. They have to be groomed because sheep are notorious for getting parasites in their nose and eyes. In certain cultures where leeches, in certain environments where leeches exist, they're even known to get leeches in their throats. And so shepherds have to be physically meeting the needs of their sheep pretty much constantly. And they always have to be on the move to find new grazing area because they will overgraze a hill. Okay? So we have we're being compared to sheep here. Our dependency is total. We don't like to think that, do we? We like to think that we have a great amount of control over our lives. I think some of us are learning maybe that's not the case. Jesus points out the nature of his care for us in Luke 12. In verse 22, he says this. He says, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. For life is more than food, and a body more than clothes. Consider the ravens. They don't sow or reap, yet they have no storeroom or barn. Yet God feeds them. And how much more valuable are you than the birds?" So God is sustaining us. He is meeting our needs. You lack for nothing. You have all you need in God. Some are saying, well, I need food. Well, guess who's providing your food? Or I need shelter. God is the provider. God is the one that meets our needs. So God is a provider, but the shepherd also, in this case, provides maybe a more valuable thing to us in our culture. Sometimes required a shepherd-initiated stop to busyness. Sometimes the shepherd has to come in and say, stop, no more, sit down. Verse 2 is interesting. It says, he makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. We focus on the green pastures, beautiful green pastures, and calm, still waters. But the first line says, what does he do? He doesn't encourage us to go to still waters or green pastures. He doesn't nudge us. It says he makes us lie down. He makes me lie down. Looking at my own life, there have been times where God has made me stop. Has anybody had that in your life where God has said, no more, you are going to stop? If you haven't, you might want to invite him to do this. It's a weird thing. I tend to be a person that likes to go all of the time. I've mentioned before, if you're a pastor of a church, if you violate 9 of the 10 commandments, you could lose your job. Okay? Adultery, murder, you're done as a pastor. But you know what? If you don't, as a pastor, get this, as a pastor, if you don't remember the Sabbath and keep it holy, if you don't take a break, you might actually get a raise for violating one of the 10 commandments. Some of you have been pastors know this, that a congregation is perfectly happy if the pastor works every single day of the week. I'm really careful of it with our volunteers. I am worried when our volunteers are working all of the time. We need to stop. And just on a personal note, I've told you before, mentioning Norm again, I routinely talk with Norm. Norm was the pastor of this church. Was it 30 years, Millie? He was the pastor here. Norm pastored here for 30 years. He's got a good depth of experience to what it means to be a pastor. And there have been times when I've been particularly frazzled where I've gone into Norm's office, and I believe Norm was God's voice talking to me. God was speaking through Norm, and Norm said, Mike, you need to stop. You need to take a day off. I remember a couple occasions where he said, you need to take several days off. You have to stop. Your brain is not working right now. You're tired. We need to break and take breaks from the busyness. God wants you to lie down in green pastures and by still waters, and he would love you to just do it on your own. But if you don't, he might make you, and it's for your own good. God says, stop. I love the imagery used here. Green pastures, still waters. Over the summer, we went to Joshua Tree National Park. Has anybody been to Joshua Tree outside of Palm Desert, Palm Springs area, California? It's a really unique national park. And what you see there on the left is a Joshua Tree. And it's a very arid, very dry climate. It's a wonder that anything can survive. And the plants that you find in the desert there are plants that can amazingly survive without a whole lot of water hitting them. And we were driving through this dry, and the park really has sort of two climate zones, and in one it gets even drier, where there's almost no sage or brush or anything around. It's just dry. And as we were driving, we saw a sign that said Cottonwood Spring. So we drove through the park. It was a little dirt road you could turn off on, or a narrow road you could turn off on. And we turned down that road and drove probably about a half mile or so. And all of a sudden, we came to this oasis. It was amazing. All of a sudden, in this really tight, dense little area, palm trees were bursting forward. And there was shade. It was absolutely, it was such a contrast to just feet away, where once again it turned to rocky, dry, barren land. But there was this little spring that popped out of the ground there, Cottonwood Spring. And life flourished there. And again, I thought it was this kind of amazing picture of what life looks like for us. God wants to lead you to the spring. And so often we resist him. God provides a spring. God makes springs happen. Sometimes you're in a dark spot, a brutal place in your life, and you say, there's no way this is going to change. This is just bad, and it looks like it's bad as far as I can see. And then all of a sudden, God is the one who can bring nourishment and sustenance and peace and provision right to that space, right to that area. God quenching parched things is a recurring theme in the Bible. In Isaiah chapter 41, he says, I'm going to make rivers flow on barren heights and springs within the valleys. I will turn the desert into pools of water and the parched ground into springs. The thing is, folks, the spring only works if we're willing to stop by it. Oftentimes God provides us a place, but through our will, we're still not willing to rest. So my challenge for us this morning is let's be a people who embrace rest. I mentioned earlier the 10 Commandments. If you're one of those folks that doesn't take a day off, I would say this. This is harsh, but I'll say it. You're living outside God's will. Without a day of Sabbath, you are living outside of God's will. Remember the Sabbath, keep it holy. It's one of the top 10, folks. It's in there. I double-checked. Taking a break is part of our natural rhythm that God created us to live into. This week I bought a new pneumatic tool. And one of the things it says when you buy a pneumatic tool, for those of you that are kind of carpenters or that kind of things, it says on it, failure to oil between uses will void the warranty. Every pneumatic tool I've ever bought says that. Fail to oil between uses will void warranty. That you need to stop from time to time and put some oil in there. And without oil put into that pneumatic hose, that pneumatic tool will start to grind against itself and stop. It'll stop working. You need to oil You need a break. You need to rest. You need to stop. If you don't, you're not going to experience what Psalm 23 talks about at the level it's intended. You know what I was thinking about this week as I was kind of working through this sermon is I'm a long way removed from being a 4-year-old, okay? I'm 50 years removed from being a four-year-old, okay? And I remember as a little kid, I'd be out just playing, and some of you can harken back to this time. I'd be, playing on my, my trike bike, or on my, I'd be out digging holes or whatever I did for fun back then, throwing rock. It was different, it's not like, we didn't have video games when I was 4. And I'd be out playing, and my mom would say, Mike, it's time for a nap. And you know what I would do? I'd go, no nap, I don't want a nap, I don't want a nap. And as adults, now we go, who doesn't want a nap, right? We're like, what do you mean, I don't want a nap? Who doesn't want a nap? But I started rethinking that this week. I think a lot of us still don't want a nap. I think our Heavenly Father comes to us and says, it's time to stop. It's time to rest. It's time to just spend a day with me, restoring yourself. And we go, oh, I don't want to, And because of that, we wear down and we wear out. Here's the beautiful thing. And I love how the 3rd verse begins. And that's where we're going to stop this morning. We'll pick up the second half of the 3rd verse next week. But I love how the 3rd verse begins. It says, He restores my soul. He restores my soul. Our shepherd is a soul restorer. You know what restoration means? We look at that and it goes, well, it makes me feel better. He's a soul restorer. He makes me feel better. I think that is a really gross understatement of what he actually wants to do. If you look at the word restore or restoration, the Greek root here literally means to return or to turn back. When we're talking about restoring, we are talking about returning or turning back to the way we were designed to be, to the state we were intended to live in. It's not just throwing a Band-Aid on us right now and covering up a wound. It is returning us to a place where we were supposed to actually be. In some ways, it's a new start. Sin, the evil of the world, the chaos of life pulls us further and further and further away of how we were intended to live. Sometimes a disaster like a pandemic, it can either cause us to run towards God or even run away from Him. Political chaos can cause us to run towards God or run towards more chaos. God is saying, I'm going to restore your soul. I want to return you to a level of relationship that we once had before you got so busy, before your life got so chaotic. I want to take you back to that place. I was thinking this week, sometimes our attempts to improve our life takes us further away from God. I look at my own life as I've added stuff and things and activity, all of it in my mind that I thought was going to make life much better. In some cases, it made me happy for a time, some contentment for a window. Definitely made me busier, but it did not always cause peace. We need to be careful when we do things, when we add things to our life, that they're really meaningful. And if they're taking us further away from God, we need to stop and return back to God. I remembered a story this week from the news, and I thought it was sort of a perfect metaphor for what we're talking about this morning. In 2012, in Spain, an elderly woman was looking at a famous fresco that was painted on a building in her community. And she thought it looked tired and a little worn out. So she said, you know what? I'm going to restore this painting. Anybody remember this story? She said, I'm going to restore this painting. Janice, I think we have a picture there. On the left is what the painting originally looked like, the fresco originally looked like. It had gotten worn down over time. And Jesus looked like that in the middle, and she thought, you know what, I'm going to restore it. And on the right is what she wound up with. That her efforts to improve, to fix, to repair, fell woefully short. It actually does not even look like a human being on the right anymore. And it reminded me a lot of times we take what's being offered to us and we try to improve upon it. And in our efforts to improve upon it, we actually cause more damage. She failed miserably. The reality is, if you follow art, anybody here watch Antiques Roadshow ever? I love that show. I really enjoy that show. But a lot of times they'll be talking about restoration work that's been done. And somebody that is a professional restorer will come in and use the same media, will use the same chemical balance in the paint that was used, trying to match it as identically to the original materials that was used. Will be an expert in detail work, restoring to the original, so that when the restoration has occurred, it looks more like the image on the left than the image on the right. It looks like how it was originally intended. God is coming into our lives every day, and you know what he wants to do? He just wants to return us to how we were intended to be, our creative order, the way our creation, our design was intended to be. And he is the ultimate restorer. He restores our soul. He brings us back to the place he wanted us to be. Our job in this is to be running towards God, running towards the shepherd. We all know this. If you've got a group of sheep on a hillside, and they're resting on a hill, the sheep that are closest to the shepherd are the safest ones, are the ones most protected. I thought of a verse this morning, James chapter 4, verses 7 and 8. It says, submit yourselves to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Come near to God, and he'll come near to you. We have a shepherd that is working to come near to us. And the nearer we are to the shepherd, the more at peace we'll be. The more likely we are to find ourselves by still waters, the more likely we are to find ourselves in grassy fields where he will fill us. Let's stand this morning as we close with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Get some rest today. Enjoy Sabbath. Enjoy time with family. And we will see you back here next week.